بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين، والصلاة والسلام على عبده ورسوله وخليله وصفوته من خلقه نبينا وإمامنا وسيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سلك سبيله واهتدى بهداه إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. The issue of making dua of rahmah or maghfirah for a person who died on kufr is a recurring issue. We've briefly touched upon it in the past, and I didn't want to go over it to address other issues. But since some brothers insisted, and this time around it was made to be a bigger controversy than usual, and more importantly for me is that this is a matter that falls under wala and bara. And also some ignorant heads have mentioned unprecedented proof, which we'll analyze insha'Allah ta'ala. In the past 2 decades, more so in the past decade, a lot of the times when a known inventor or public figure of some sort, or an activist or a famous humanitarian aid worker, or other figures of the kuffar, in fact it happened when one of the imams of kufr died, the Pope himself. This matter surfaces time and time again, and every time it returns, in the past decade, it returns stronger than before. It was an issue, but not that big of an issue, when Princess Diana died, because they say that she helped take the landmines that were left behind by the Soviets in Afghanistan. So some Muslims felt they wanted to make dua for her, but it wasn't that big of an issue. It occurred when the imams of the dalala, who attribute themselves to this ummah, made dua for the Pope when he died. It was a big issue when Steve Jobs died. People lost their tawheed over their love of an iPhone. This new controversy was sparked by the unjust death of the Palestinian Christian reporter in Palestine. This entire controversy is a manifestation and a symptom of a much bigger issue. People have an issue with wala and bara. The snippets that were released in Ramadan on wala and bara were sufficient to address this issue broadly and from many angles. Let me give you an example. In one of the clips, I mentioned numerous verses that contain the la'an of kuffar in the Quran. La'an is what? La'an is the exact opposite of rahmah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does la'an on the kuffar. These ignorant fools want to amend and revise it by doing rahmah upon them, wal-'iyadhu billah. Part of wala and bara is to know the destiny of those who die on kufr. Part of wala and bara is to know your stance towards a kafir and a kafira, dead and alive. Wala and bara is to fully believe how gruesome and grisly and hideous kufr and shirk really are. What have the munafiqeen and zanadiqa been instilling in the ummah in the past decade? Minimizing differences among faiths, downplaying the differences, interfaith. We wouldn't have this discussion today if people realized that shirk is al-dhulm al-azim. Ya bunayya la tushrik billahi inna ash-shirka la dhulmun azim. The new call is to take out the hatred against other beliefs. The new call is to respect and normalize the abuse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will not perfect your tawheed unless you hate kufr more than you hate being thrown into a fire. Think of how much you would hate being thrown into a fire. And then think of the level of the hatred you have towards kufr. If the hatred of kufr that you have is not at the same level or more, then work on your iman. وَأَنْ يَكْرَهَ أَنْ يَعُودَ فِي الْكُفْرِ كَمَا يَكْرَهُ أَنْ يُقْذَفَ فِي النَّارِ. This is the result of that deviance that they've been spreading. Sadly, it took its toll on this ummah. Yes, ignorance of the revelation, the Quran and the Sunnah, may be a reason in this matter, but I believe the great portion of it was caused by the fact that there's a strong movement downplaying wala and bara through interfaith and other kufr means. From the zanadiqa and munafiqeen who attribute themselves to this deen. And it's funded and supported globally and intensely. This matter is known by fitrah. It doesn't need proof. It's by fitrah. For anyone who says, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, to love Allah. And to hate one who abuses and reviles the one who created you, and nourished you, and sustained you. This wasn't an issue in the time of your grandparents or your great-grandparents. Even if they were illiterate. You might find some exceptions, but definitely not at the intensity that it's at now. It's probably unprecedented in this specific issue. In fact, some heads, like I said, invented a new argument as proof to justify dua of rahmah to a person who died on kufr. It was never mentioned in the past 1400 years. When people no longer felt how hideous kufr is, this is the only result to expect. The sham calls for dialogue and tolerance and interfaith that took off from Mecca down to Spain by the doomed king and those similar to them globally, everywhere you go, they're a front to demolish wala and bara. Calls and plans for this new Abrahamic faith, the 3-in-1, mosque, synagogue, and church together, Quran, Bible, and Torah together, that tainted the hearts. Some who were calling for this issue, this specific issue, were not really moved by emotion or concern for anyone or for a political cause, other than it was a great opportunity to further dilute wala and bara and express their deviation. Muslims no longer realize how dreadful and awful it is to attribute a son to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or to commit shirk and kufr. And again, I said this in the Ramadan clips. تكاد السماوات يتفطرن منه وتنشق الأرض وتخر الجبال هدا. The heavens are about to burst and the earth is about to be split apart. The mountains are about to be crumbled. Why? أن دعوا للرحمن ولدا. They ascribed a son to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Hadith al-Qudsi, شتمني ابن آدم وما ينبغي له أن يشتمني. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Hadith al-Qudsi, they reviled me. How did they revile him? By stating, I have a son. This time around, the masses and their leaders who are calling to make dua of rahmah or istighfar for a kafir or a kafira are mainly from lands that are occupied, or those who support that cause or sympathize with that cause. Our lands, our beloved lands, one of our holiest sites that we yearn and long to liberate and visit and live in there. Pay attention to what I'm getting at. Those people have the utmost hatred for occupiers who took the Muslim land, what they refer to as Arabic lands. My grandfather in Haifa, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, was an extremely wealthy businessman who owned massive amounts of property on the Mediterranean Sea, the shore of the Mediterranean Sea in Haifa. One of the most strategic and valuable land in the country. It's occupied now. And he fought, but was forced out with only the clothes on his back. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him firdaus. And subhanallah, it was days like this 74 years ago when my beloved father as a child was displaced from his house in 1948. From first-hand experience, from someone who has a personal right to land that's there, and every Muslim has the right to that land, our hatred is not founded on their oppression and occupation. It may add to it, but that's not the foundation of it. Our hatred is fully intact whether they give us the land back, or if it's attained by force, or if they continue as occupiers. The foundation of the hatred is based on the kufr itself. Because we value the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than our own rights, as every Muslim should. The occupation oppression may add to the hate, but there's a foundational level of hate that doesn't go away so long as there is kufr. Some of their biggest shuyukh openly said the adawa with them stops when we get our land back. And we say what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to follow in the footsteps of Ibrahim alayhi salam, حَتَّى تُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَحْدَهُ. The adawa stops when? حَتَّى تُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَحْدَهُ. The Arabic hatred and those who sympathize with the cause for the Zionist occupiers is extreme. Would they ever do rahmah on one of those Zionists who occupies the land and oppresses them? Absolutely not. They're transgressed on. They're abused by occupiers who took lands. Family members were killed and imprisoned. Farms destroyed. Houses leveled. Disgraced honor. People beaten. They would never say make dua of maghfirah or rahmah on a Zionist when he dies. Of course, today, there's some exceptions on that as well. But I'm generally speaking, suggesting dua of maghfirah to a Zionist over there may put your life at stake. This recent outcry to make dua for a non-Muslim journalist who died was in part due to the great hatred for occupiers and due to their recognition and love for anyone who hates those occupiers and stands against them and exposes them regardless of who they are. They will not ask for maghfirah or rahmah for one who abuses them, but a person who reviles and abuses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with shirk, yes they will. They want everyone to do rahmah, make dua of rahmah and istighfar upon him. That's someone who doesn't value or respect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he should be valued and respected. وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ وَالْأَرْضُ جَمِيعًا قَبْضَتُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. They do not estimate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with an estimation he deserves. They respect and value themselves and their rights more than they do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wal-iyadu billah. Violating their rights is more sacred than violating the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you understand my point? My point of that is, had they valued Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he should be valued, this wouldn't be an issue of discussion today. Transgression to dignity and honor and wealth and life has become more important than transgression against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's a deficiency in Tawheed. Those same people who call for rahmah on a dead mushrik or mushrika, if they merely hear this criticism that I'm doing right now of them, they wouldn't be asking for rahmah upon me when I die, nor do I want it unless they come back to the pure Tawheed. What I'm trying to say is, for example, if a fasiq verbally abuses them or their loved ones, they would do la'an on him when he dies, not ask people to do rahmah upon him. Masses of the ummah today no longer realize the severity of shirk and associating a partner to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you're not going to get upset for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are you going to get upset for? Some let their emotions supersede their tawheed and the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah, and that's also a deficiency in their tawheed. Tomorrow, I believe, commemorates what they call a Nakba. 74 years of occupation, and sadly, the compass to direct them to guidance and victory hasn't been found yet. From the basic, definitive, certain principles of Islam is that success in Akhirah and being swayed from Jahannam and admitted to Jannah is based on La ilaha illallah. فَمَنْ زُحْزِحَ عَنِ النَّارِ وَأُدْخِلَ الْجَنَّةَ فَقَدْ فَازَ. Isn't that the first thing we teach our children? Or I should say, maybe we used to teach our children? We say, Habibi, come here. Jannah is for a Muslim. Jahannam is for kafir. It depends on Tawheed. It depends on Iman in Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whoever doesn't believe in that will not succeed. All other faiths and beliefs after the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam who don't believe in his message are kuffar, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden Jannah upon them. إِنَّهُ مَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah has forbidden Jannah upon the mushrikeen. وَالَّذِي نَفْسُ مُحَمَّدٍ بِيَدِهِ لا يسمع بي أحد من هذه الأمة يهودي ولا نصراني ثم يموت ولم يؤمن بالذي أرسلت به إلا كان من أصحاب النار. By Allah, any Jew or Christian who hears of me and dies without believing in my message, he will be among those who enters Jahannam. Allah judged it. Allah judged that. Allah declared that. The beginning of the verse that I just mentioned, إِنَّهُ مَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. What's the beginning of it? لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ مَرْيَمَ. Those who say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Messiah are kuffar. لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ ثَالِثُ ثَلَاثَةٍ وَمَن يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَن يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted of him. And in the Akhirah, he'll be among the losers. 2 times in the Quran in the same surah, Surah An-Nisa. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah does not forgive that partners should be ascribed to him, but he forgives anything else to whom he pleases. They want forgiveness to a category of people Allah declared will not be forgiven. They want Jannah for people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said Jannah is haram upon them. Basically thinking they got more rahmah and more wisdom than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wal-'iyadhu billah. Such a simple, basic principle. But as soon as someone popular with some vanishing dunya accomplishments or inventions or whatever he did, even if he built the globe masajid and he died on shirk, then this principle gets smothered and compromised. The massive global campaigns to destroy Aqidah in general and specifically the principle of wala and bara in the hearts has taken its toll on this ummah. What you see of the outpouring call to do rahmah and ask Allah for maghfirah for someone who died on kufr is a manifestation of that. Evil scholars who maximize on this for their own gain played a big role in deceiving the ummah as well. One of the most popular heads that led this latest fitna pertaining to this issue, the one who has a history of making up things based on what he calls numerical miracles from the Quran. He fooled people for years and years with his numerical conclusions, and now suddenly wants to speak on matters like this. Instead of speaking up on making dua of rahmah and istighfar for a kafir, he should have been spending his time figuring out how to cover up his recent embarrassment when he predicted for years upon years, fooling the ignorant masses, that the demise of Israel will be between March and June of 2022 based on his supposed numerical calculations. In fact, I read a statistic and I really ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it's not true, that 73% of Palestinians believe that. He, among others, came up with an unprecedented justification to allow dua of rahmah for a kafir. No one in the history of Islam before mentioned it. We'll address that claim inshallah and other claims that reached me in detail. Islam is not technology. Tawheed is not an iPhone or a piece of technology that needs updating every 3 months. Tawheed is not an invention for one to develop apps to add to it. The matter of making istighfar to a kafir who died on kufr is so clear that An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala related ijma' that it's not permissible. Al-Qarafi from Al-Malikiyya and Ibn Allan from Al-Shafi'iyya considered it kufr to do istighfar to one you know died on kufr. And they said, if one is in doubt that maybe that person reverted to Islam, if he's in doubt, one shouldn't make istighfar for him as well. Why would they consider it kufr to make istighfar to one who died on kufr? Because Allah clearly, subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah clearly said that you're not supposed to do it, and you're defying the verses. مَا كَانَ لِلنَّبِيِّ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن يَسْتَغْفِرُوا لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ. It's rejection of the verses. When you say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have rahmah and maghfirah on a dead kafir, it's rejecting verses and rebelling against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said he wouldn't do. Basically making dua of istighfar to one who dies on kufr is thinking one can amend what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed. إِنَّهُ مَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. Jannah is haram upon a mushrik. They say, who are you to say who gets the mercy of Allah? That's something they always say. And we return that question back at them. أَهُمْ يَقْسِمُونَ رَحْمَةَ رَبِّكَ. Neither of us have the authority to speak on the division of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except in accordance to what the creator of Ar-Rahmah, Allah Jalla fi'ula, taught us and told us. The proper way to get kuffar into Jannah is not to tamper and manipulate with Allah's rules pertaining to His rahmah and maghfirah, thinking you can allow someone into Jannah who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said Jannah is haram upon him. The proper way to get him into Jannah is to give them da'wah while they're alive, to fully understand and embrace La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and to warn them not to die like the others who died on kufr and shirk, because their destiny is a blazing Jahannam. We're more eager than anyone for people to enter Jannah. But our limit is the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the way to do it is da'wah to them while they're alive, not dua of forgiveness after they die on shirk. To keep this clear, so you remain focused, the issue at hand is the issue of making dua or istighfar and rahmah for a person who died on kufr, and matters that relate to that. We'll take a short break for salah, inshallah, and then we'll continue after that. جزاكم الله خير وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.